I suppose the difference between the 1980s and now is that in the 1980s the campaign was to stop the amendment going into the Constitution, and today the campaign is to get the amendment out of the Constitution. Since 1983 there have been 4 referendums. In 1992, after the X case, we had an attempt to roll back the X case judgment to make it illegal for someone who was suicidal to have an abortion. The people rejected that one. In the same year, 1992, we had referenda on freedom to travel for an abortion and on access to information. The people voted for those overwhelmingly. People have gradually learned about this issue. I was one of the people who voted against the amendment in 1983. I think at that time many people knew very little about the issue of abortion. It wasn't something spoken about. Having said that, women were travelling in large numbers to Britain from 1967, when the British legislation was passed. The first statistics that I've seen were quoted in a House of Commons debate in about 1973 or 4, and they showed that about 1,500 people from the Republic had travelled for abortions. In 2002, we had a referendum again about rolling back the X case judgment. The people rejected it. That referendum would also have placed a piece of incredibly restrictive legislation into the Constitution. The abortion issue is actually something that many people find difficult to deal with, and only just over 40% of the people went to the polls in that referendum. It was a very narrow result. There were about 10,000 votes between the 2 groupings in the referendum. And I suppose what has happened since is that we had the European Court of Human Rights case and the verdict in that in 2010. That required the state to make clear when a person who might be entitled to have an abortion, if her life was in danger, or including from suicide. But it was the Savita Halappanavar death, people out on the streets demanding change, and pressurised the state so that within a matter of months we had legislation that clarified when it was possible for a woman whose life was at risk to have an abortion. Campaigning has gone on for further change, and there have been cases that have highlighted what the impacts of the 8th Amendment have been, including the case in which a woman who essentially had died was kept alive by machines until her family managed to get a court order allowing her to die with some dignity. I think the Citizens' Assembly has been a really interesting exercise. I think what was really interesting about the Citizens' Assembly was that very ordinary people with no connection with this issue could take the time to learn about it, and having learned about it, having learned about the impacts of the 8th Amendment, they came up with what was, by Irish standards, a really radical series of suggestions. I think that it's really only in the past 7 or 8 years that the issue has been in the public domain to such an extent, with people's personal stories being told. It's only in that period that it's properly hitting home to people that this can happen to anybody, that people probably know someone who's had an abortion even if they're not going to talk to anyone about it. And I think it's probably hitting home that your daughter could be in this position, your mother could be in this position. I think that since 2010 more women have come forward and have spoken in public about those experiences, and that has been very difficult for people to do. Actually, they're very private experiences and people should not have to do that. But perhaps it's going to be the only way in which we will bring about change. And I feel for those people who have felt such pressure to speak because they empathise to such an extent with other people who are going to face exactly the same problems.